Okay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for sticking through our business and updates, but we have a wonderful treat in store for what we've now coined as our annual update from the Office of Equity and team as they continue to grow and develop programming, both internally and externally, and more importantly, continue to be in partnership with the things that we know need to be addressed and working strategically and in community together to help change some of the systems that make things a little bit more exciting to approach. So we welcome you all and thank you for making the time to join us this evening. And as always, once they finish their presentation, we will take questions from our membership and feel free along the way to place things into chat, as I'm sure some things can be tackled along the way. So thank you all. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much for having us, powerful, wonderful folks at the NAACP, and thank you, President Lynch, for the invitation. We just want to take a moment while we're in this screen setting to introduce ourselves, but we do have a PowerPoint that we'll share right now. So we're so excited that our team is growing and continuing to grow, and also baby Franco's on the way, so we'll have a new member soon. We've got 3 permanent staff and we've got 3 grant-funded and time-limited staff who we're doing everything we can to make sure that they have a long-term and sustainable future at the County of Sonoma. So my name's Alegria de la Cruz. I have the privilege and the honor of directing the Office of Equity, and I will pass it to Melissa.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having us here. My name is Melissa Valle, and I am the County Equity Program Manager with the Office of Equity. I'll pass it on to Ruby.
Hey everyone, my name is Ruby Olvera. I am the office's community engagement analyst, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as a Latinx Mexican mujer. Thank you for having us here, and I'll pass it on to Roxanne.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Roxanne Ezet. I'm one of the newest team members and so excited to be here. My pronouns are she, her. I am an equity and social justice data analyst, and I identify as a daughter of a Middle Eastern immigrant and Polish immigrants. And I will pass it on to Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. Lindsay Franco here. I am the Racial Equity and Social Justice Data Analyst for the office. But tonight I get to take that hat off because I'm officially on maternity leave. So I'm here in support of my wonderful team. You're in great hands.
Thank you. Thank you. I also wanted to just take a moment to lift up and to celebrate the work of really wonderful folks that we have the power and privilege of working with every day inside of the County of Sonoma, who are members of our core team. So I'm just going to go as I see you. So Rob Halverson, Adriana Jones, Chantel Reese, where are you? Jasmine Gudino. Am I missing anybody? I'm going to keep clicking through. Denia Candela, we just are celebrating her move to Marin County, and Adriana Arizon, of course, who was when she was with the county, helped to build the beginnings of this office. So thank you to those past, present, and future who continue to work with us to develop this work. I am going to share my screen. Oop, can't do that yet.
How about now?
All right. Okay. Can you see this? Let's see. Are you? There we go. How's that? Better? Okay. So we went through a couple of these slides already. And we are going to start with a land and labor acknowledgement, and I'm going to share the screen for Rubit here. Oh, did we just lose her?
Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
No,
My internet's a little weird today, but thank you. Okay. So yeah, so we'll go ahead and start with our land and labor acknowledgement. And just to share that the Office of Equity does not yet have our own version of a land and labor acknowledgement. We're really grateful to the Parks Department for sharing their work in community, and to Sherry Congreve Wilson for sharing the labor acknowledgement And as part of our best practice from what we learned from our Native American community is that we ask that if you are able to please stand with us and share the land, and as we share the land and labor acknowledgement. So I'll give folks a few minutes to adjust if they'd like to join us to stand. So the County of Sonoma recognizes that we are on the ancestral lands of the Coast, Miwok, Pomo, and Wapo, who are the original caretakers of this area. We strive to optimize Indigenous voices to share their own histories as to not perpetuate another form of being silenced. While recognizing the past, we honor the resiliency of Native people still in their ancestral territories in relationship with their land and culture. We would also like to spend a moment to respectfully acknowledge the enslaved people, primarily of African descent, who provided labor on which this country was built with little to no recognition. Today, we are indebted to their labor and the labor of many Black and Brown bodies that continue to work in the shadows for our collective benefit. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rubit. And our agenda for tonight, we are going to share a brief overview of what we're up to. Going to talk about the creation of our mission, vision, and values, an update on what the core team is up to, and an update with our partners at Health Action Together around the agenda for action. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. And we are going to start with talking a little bit about the process that we entered into as we started to work on developing our mission, vision, and values. I'll turn it back to Rubit.
Yes, so last year we worked on creating our vision, mission, and values, and that was through a series of engagement efforts, including community listening sessions, gathering input from different folks, including the Petaluma Blacksburg Community Annual Picnic, and input from our internal core team. So some of the folks that we kind of highlighted here today. And really, we were asking 3 questions for the vision, mission, and values. You were asking what resonated for folks, what didn't feel good, did anything feel tokenizing, harmful, or not genuine in what we were sharing? And most importantly, asking what is missing. And before we dive into them, we just want to acknowledge that this is a living document. We recognize that the things and the words and the way that they land really changed over time. And if there's anything here that lands wrong today, please let us know. Our goal is always to reflect what we love and see in community in a way that's both respectful and responsible. So we'll go ahead and start off with our vision.
Thank you, Robert. Here's what we started. And, a vision statement tells us where we're going, but it's not what we're doing or how we're going to get there. And for that reason, it's fearless. And for us, it comes down to a world where the Office of Equity no longer has to exist because equity is built into our systems. Racial equity is built into our systems. So our vision reads, a Sonoma County where power and resources are distributed equitably, where systems support every community member as they work together to cultivate well-being, agency, and liberation, and where people of all races and identities can live authentically, heal, and thrive.
I will talk about our mission. The mission statement is really the role that we play in reaching that vision. And we work to ensure that it's specific, it's clear, and it's accountable to the community. So the Office of Equity's mission reads that our mission is to work in authentic and collaborative partnerships with county government, with Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, and with community members who are disproportionately impacted by the systemic inequities to all 3 of the following: recognize and disrupt systemic harm, redesign structures and direct resources towards healing, liberation, and belonging, and to build transparency and accountability in county institutions, in their policies and culture.
We also identified 7 key values that really ground us and help us to lead our work going forward. So our values include anti-racism, designing to the margins, collective and transformative leadership, authentic collaboration, healing-centered practices, strategic community investments, transparency, and accountability. And we're not going to go through each of them, but we do want you all to know that we define these. It is really in the interest of the Office of Equity that we share language throughout our systems and that we share language throughout our community as a whole. So I just want to highlight a couple that we really hold key to our work. So we recognize anti-Blackness and anti-Indigeneity as the foundations of racial inequity. And for that reason, we place loving focus on Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Latinx, Latine, Asian, Pacific Islanders, and all communities of color whose lives have been harmed by racism. And therefore, we practice anti-racism, which is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. Something that's also key to our work is authentic collaboration, which we wanted to lift up again here. And so we recognize that the people who are closest to the challenges that we're trying to solve are also closest to the solutions. And so we work to build trusting reciprocal relationships with communities that we learn from, we amplify, and we operationalize that wisdom and those experiences, and to make sure that they are resourced and valued as we work together in a co-design process. We also want to lift up transparency and accountability. We represent institutions and an institution that has been responsible for harming people over generations. And so we recognize that the distrust that communities have towards government is the direct result of that governmental harm. And that we, as we move forward, that we as government are responsible for building and earning that trust. And so we hold ourselves accountable to community members for transforming the policies, practices, and programs that have led to racialized disproportional outcomes. And we commit to communicating openly and bi-directionally, not just one side coming out, with community members about what it is that we do, our policies, our processes, and our practices. If you are interested in hearing a little bit more about how we define each of these values, you can find information on our website, and one of us will at some point drop a link into the chat if we haven't already. Oh, you guys are awesome, already there. So those are our values.
Thank you. So you may be wondering, how do we put all of this into practice? But thankfully, we're not the only jurisdiction trying to do this work. And the first recognition here about how we drive equity and institutional change is that this work isn't linear, it's cyclical and it's ongoing. But here are some main practices. So we start by recognizing that we need to normalize conversations about racial equity within the county and the community we serve. So we need shared language, definitions, and a constant recognition and understanding that racial disparities exist here in our county today. Then we organize. We know that 6 humans and hopefully soon 9 in the Office of Equity will not transform this entire institution just by ourselves. So we need everyone to get on board and do this work with us. We'll talk about the core team a little later in the steering committee, but this is in this phase of organizing is where we have engaged and organized the staff who expressed interest and who said, I want to do this with you, to start, brainstorming and creating the structures to support this work. And then we operationalize. We move actually into implementing change in harmful policies, programs, and practices through the use of data and anti-racist performance metrics. And this is where we get to create the participatory processes in which staff and communities lived experiences are part of the co-design of new processes intended to mitigate, stop, or reverse the harm created by our institutions for centuries. And so we've gone through this in our work. We have had affinity groups to normalize the conversations. We have organized the core team and the steering committee to lead the process that will be to operationalize racial equity through the creation of a racial equity action plan, of which we'll talk a little bit about too later.
And this is a little infographic that tells you about the ways in which we're structured right now. So we have kind of split our work into 4 main areas. We have the racial equity learning program that Melissa talked about. In that learning program, we had affinity groups in Black, white, and non-Black people of color working together in safe spaces to learn together. Those affinity groups and those kind of created a next step in learn how to train, how to have tough conversations. We worked on train the trainer, and we also transformed into making sure that we know how to use data in powerful ways. So the program that we're working on right now is called the Anti-Racist, oops, I just went backwards. Anti-Racist Results-Based Accountability. That is the kind of pilot process that is being worked on right now through the American Rescue Plan Act funding allocation process. And that's part of what we're doing to really help departments throughout the county through our technical assistance and through partnerships to figure out how to do our county work in a different way that really centers equity, that really recognizes the disproportionate impact that our work has on BIPOC communities. We also work on supporting all the departments that have been identified as having significant board items moving forward to do something called the Race Equity Impact Analysis. And that is making sure that every time we decide that we're going to spend money or take some significant policy action, that there is a corresponding analysis. And we're going to kind of walk you through the steps of how we're doing that right now. So keep your eyes peeled for those significant board items that will contain, as a requirement of this policy action by the board, these analyses. We're also doing a ton of technical assistance to our partners in disaster recovery and response. And that's a program that has been funded. We're going to move to the third box here by ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. And so this is one of the big kind of projects that we're taking on right now. We've gotten funded to ensure that we are developing capacity inside of our county systems to actually be able to do race equity work. So we heard very loudly and very clearly from our community that we need to have a consistent and a common way of making sure that our county is providing language access, language justice, right? That's the goal that we're driving towards, but we need to have some consistent policy and a plan for implementation of that policy. So that's one piece of what we're doing with ARPA funding. And the second piece of that is developing a community engagement plan. And that's all about making sure that we have this bi-directional communication, that it's an actual conversation, that we're teaching people how important it is to actually listen to community members. And there is a racial equity action plan, which we'll talk about a little bit further. Am I freezing? Are people hearing me okay?
Breaking up. You were breaking up a little bit. You're okay right now.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to pass it to.
So we've been talking about the steering committee. Here's the images of these amazing leaders. They're an activated and engaged working group that is grounded in the realities of Sonoma County communities, and also a group of people who are staying connected and responsive to the county's internal community and to the Office of Equity. So these folks are the people that we count on. We see them as an extension of us as leaders in anti-racist work through the creation of the Racial Equity Action Plan. And we're grateful for their commitment, active commitment to this work. We also know that in 6 months, we've lost about 3 of them, all who have gone to relevant positions where equity can and should flourish. So we can also see the impact of our training and of the steering committee and of our core team members that have left and are continuing to do this work in other areas. But for the ones that are still here, the work at hand, like we've been saying, is the Racial Equity Action Plan, which is the next slide. And so we are grounded and we know that the county has a unique responsibility to the whole community to address the racial inequities of systems, services, policies, and practices. And so we see the countywide Racial Equity Action Plan as a tool to respond to this responsibility. We know that racial equity action plans can put a theory of change into action and achieve a collective vision of racial equity. So this kind of plan is a formal commitment to achieving racial equity by organizing a roadmap of action items, goals, and measurable outcomes to implement institutional and structural changes within and across our county government. This is also a response to the racial equity and social justice pillar of the county strategic plan, which lives almost in isolation and almost under the exclusive responsibility of the Office of Equity. And here again, we recognize that we can't do this alone, and we need deep engagement from other county departments to move the needle. So we need to share the responsibility across the organization. So right now, the steering committee is working on defining the scope of the plan with the intention and strategy. And we know that the first round of this racial equity action plan is going to be facing internally, not lots of external focus, because we're still building that capacity inside of our systems. We continue to organize, right? And again, this work is not linear. So when we get to a place where we have defined these pieces, we'll let you know when we'll be presenting this work to the board. But in the meantime, we see opportunities in supporting your NAACP members who wear the two hats here, and in the steering committee to connect this work to this group as it happens.
And then to answer your question, Amy, the steering committee currently is made up of county staff exclusively. We have a pretty clear mandate from our Board of Supervisors that our work is not yet external, except when it's directed to be so. So, and we recognize that if we are working externally, we do not have the capacity inside of the county to hold much of the work much of the wisdom and the brilliance and the suggestions and the offers to work with us inside of the county. We don't have those structures in place yet. So we're really focused internally. And the goal is to make sure that we've got the muscles inside of this institution to hold the responsibility that we have for the harm that we've created and for the work that's before us to make sure that we're healing that harm with community. So this is one of the tools that we've worked on developing. This is it's really important to keep in mind that there's nothing inevitable or natural around the kinds of inequities that we see in our county, in our state, in our nation. Many communities of color have much lower well-being scores than white Americans, but that has nothing to do with genetics or chance, but it's because of decisions that people in power, most of them who are white, have made over centuries. These decisions were designed to capture and maintain economic and political dominance using laws and policies, and those impact our outcomes to this day. But the hopeful idea is that just as those decisions and those policies created inequity, they can also create justice and equity. So we are working every day to support departments to utilize this racial equity toolkit. And in a county where we pride ourselves on high quality and very professional work, right, we tend to stay away from the questions that we don't know the answers to, or whether the answer is not one that we want, or it's going to cost some money or highlight some form of a gap. But this is exactly the kind of analysis that we're asking departments to do. And so we're really excited about presenting this work publicly and want you to keep your eyes peeled for the ways in which our departments who are required to engage in this kind of analysis will be doing so in public meetings. These are some of the questions that folks who are engaging in this analysis have to answer as they're thinking about, a significant policy, a policy update, a significant resource allocation. So, really great thanks to the NAACP for kind of holding accountable our supervisors as well, right? Who this is their policy, and who may not have necessarily walked through these steps themselves as they were deciding whether to kind of continue disinvesting in Roseland in District 3 as they decided how they were going to allocate their money in this last set of budget negotiations. So these steps are really intended to get at the meat of really recognizing our responsibility and to ensure that people who have wisdom and data and experiences and solutions are brought to the forefront. This is another big chunk of our work. So I talked earlier about our anti-racist results-based accountability work. And this is a powerful partnership that we are happy to share with Upstream Investments, which is a project of our Human Services Department. Prior to having kind of equity slide right into the middle of the way in which our county is doing results-based accountability work, this was a performance management tool, kind of thinking about like, how are we spending our money? How are we doing? And the goal here is to make sure that we are using data in powerful ways to ask questions about what did we do? How did we do it? And is anyone better off, with a real focus on communities who continue to experience disproportionately negative outcomes, and to make sure that we are doing everything we can to hold ourselves and our partners accountable to making sure that those outcomes are changing. So we kind of use data, we break it down by demographics, We engage in a root cause analysis, really asking every time we are asking our questions, but why does this exist? But why does that exist? But why does that exist? Getting to the really root cause of some of these deep inequities, because we're not interested in band-aids. We're really interested in going to the root cause of things. And then as we engage in that root cause analysis, we're also making sure that we are strategizing with community, that folks from the community who are the ones who are touching these challenges are really engaged in defining what those programs are, what those strategies are. This really lifts up our value here that there is nothing without us that is for us. And there's 3 kind of core principles of anti-racist results-based accountability work. We create a data culture that does not pathologize individuals for their outcomes. We recognize that that is the responsibility of institutions and systems to hold that. We make sure that we're analyzing root cause, and we're really engaged in the participatory strategy development.
So that
These are
leads-
some of the, oh, go ahead, Roxanne.
I was going to say, and that leads us to strategies that we try to work for. And these anti-racist strategies, looking at that data, disaggregating that data we have, looking at outcome measures by race, by ethnicity, gender, looking at geography across the county, as well as other demographic identity markers. And we're going to be looking at social determinants of health within those capacities, analyzing the specific factors and the underlying inequities, such as racial as well as gender discrimination, disparate policy impacts that might take place, institutional and structural barriers that we need to overcome. Evaluate the performance of projects through clear, defined equity metrics. As Alighieri was saying, we're trying to build that capacity now, as well as publishing accessible and transparent program results, so everybody in the community, everyone across the county can see that, and continue community engagement in the participatory process right here with the NAACP, as well as other groups across the county.
And this is where we're going. We're going to really make sure that this vision of using an anti-racist approach to our data work, to our accountability work, is in the future of our next steps, not only the Office of Equity, but through all of the safety net departments, those departments that work every day with clients, with people, and where the goals are to make sure that we are collecting demographic data above just kind of like, are you a veteran and how old are you and where do you live, but really diving deep. And we're really excited because the ARPA work that you lifted up earlier today, like the Black Therapy Fund, that came from using an anti-racist results-based accountability approach to recognizing that those were strategies that were woefully needed inside of our community, right? Engaging in the root cause and making sure that there are programs that are developed for communities that are actually identifying these needs themselves. We're also making sure that, again, asking these why, these root cause analysis, and that we're being really clear and reporting back to the community and strategizing around how we are really addressing the root causes in the ways in which we're reaching solutions. And then using data to make funding decisions. Barbara, you asked an excellent question about whether or not the Board of Supervisors asked for any support or any analysis from the Office of Equity when it makes funding allocations. No, they did not apply their own policy to their own decisions yet. Right. And that's why we're here today to share this information with our core champions in community that we know work every day to hold our electeds accountable to what it means to be a true democracy in the county of Sonoma. So we're really excited about sharing this work with you as we move forward to make sure that all the folks in really key positions of authority have their equity goggles on.
Thank you, Lydia. So now we're going to talk a little bit about more of the ARPA funds and specifically where they went. So a part of the funds and what we learned throughout COVID was that we were able to have a lot of demographic data from COVID and ways that we never had before. And really thanks to the demands from community members like yourself and who requested that demographic data be collected and be shared, we were able to be grounded in what we learned in the pandemic and give us more data to back up what communities have been telling us for far too long, which is that there's a lack of communication between government and community and a lack of resources and accessibility specifically for BIPOC communities. and a lack of language access during disasters. So as part of the ARPA funds, we were able to lead in 3 projects. One, the community engagement plan, and developing a community engagement plan for the county, developing a language access plan and a recommended policy for the county, and third, the culturally responsive and disaster planning. So this is just a part of the funds that were received, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the goals within each of those plans. Next slide, please. So language access. So as you can see here, our goal here is really to make sure that we're effectively communicating with folks and delivering services specifically to folks that are monolingual speakers, immigrants, indigenous language speakers who live and work in Sonoma County. And here you'll see that we have this chart that really just goes from exclusion to justice. And the continuum of language access includes language exclusion on one extreme, and then moving to language tolerance, language access, and finally language justice. It's our vision that the language access plan will get us closer to language justice, as Olivia shared, and ensures that we're really effectively communicating and delivering services and programs to folks that are immigrants, monolingual speakers who speak a language other than English, and includes indigenous language speakers. So those are a few of the points from the language access work that we're doing. And I'd like to touch on our community engagement plan. So our community engagement plan, and our goal really there is to create this bidirectional process. Oftentimes we see that a county does really one-sided information where we're sharing out information, but we're not really receiving feedback or implementing the feedback that we're getting from folks. So our goal here is to create a community engagement plan that helps us achieve equitable participation and access to both our services and resources for underserved communities of color who have been traditionally marginalized from government processes and services. We know that both of these plans play a role on each other, right? We can't have a successful community engagement plan without making sure that we have a good language access plan to help us implement both. And we know that having a consistent language access plan will really help us remove language barriers and allow our community engagement efforts to be more inclusive, participatory, and representative. And as you'll see here, we're using the spectrum of community engagement by Rosa Gonzalez to kind of detail out like where are we going, where are we at right now, where are the ways in which we can move. So we have ignore, inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and defer to. One of the great examples of the ways that we were able to get closer to collaborating is ARPA, right? During the ARPA allocation process, we really were able to move from consulting with community and gathering input through town halls to collaborating, co-designing, and deferring to the needs and solutions proposed by community members. So it's really our vision that this plan will help us develop moving towards the defer to, the collaborate to, involve to, and it really allows us to be explicit about the level of engagement we're doing, provides an opportunity for authentic collaboration with community members, and work with communities that have experienced marginalization by government processes and really co-create solutions together. So that's a little bit about our vision for the community engagement plan. So the work of both of the plans are basically put into 3 parts. We have phase 1, which is internal assessment. We're looking internally about what it currently exists. What is our current capacity, practices, resources available for both of the things, language access and community engagement? How much are we actively investing in this area? And now we are moving on to external engagement. So you can say we're really in the middle of everything. So external engagement really looks at working with community members and interviewing community members to ask about their experiences with obtaining either language access or engaging with community. So there's actually going to be an opportunity where we will be doing interviews with folks. We've already started our focus groups and doing that work so that we're making sure that we're engaging folks in this process and asking about their experiences and their recommendations as we develop the plan. Similarly, in the internal portion, we did interviews and focus groups with staff, particularly bilingual staff, front-facing staff that are constantly engaging with community members and asking for their input as part of the process. And we plan to have a draft of those plans at the end of this year, early next year, so that we can share the draft out to folks. And we hope to be able to share that with you all so that we can invite you all and get your feedback on the plan. So There's a little bit more about the development of the plan. And we can go on to the next slide, please. Now I'll pass it back to Roxanne to share more about the culturally responsive disaster relief.
Thank you. So just sort of the, how we got here, why we got here. I've been a professor for a long time, and one of the things I always lecture on is how much zip code matters. The zip code in which you're born has such a weight on where you're going to end up later in life, the kinds of schools you have access to, the kinds of jobs you have access to. So the zip code where somebody is born, it impacts their health, it impacts their life outcomes. Folks may be in areas that have wonderful grocery stores and shoppings, or they may be in an area that's a food desert. We see the numbers of folks living in concentrated poverty, neighborhood violence, school quality, job opportunities, health outcomes, and those all relate to geography, but that intersection of race, ethnicity with a person's life outcome is really strong. And that became so clear during the COVID pandemic. We look at our nation's history of redlining and racial covenants, and that's left a very damaging legacy in neighborhoods all across the country. And we see that here in Sonoma County. So when COVID struck, communities of color were disproportionately burdened. They were burdened economically, loss of jobs, businesses that were closed, facing increased risk of contracting COVID due to the types of employment they may have had. They weren't given PPE appropriately at their workplaces. The types of employment were, some people able to work from home remotely, other people were forced to still be out engaging with the public, living in overcrowded home environments may have put those folks at further risk of spreading COVID among their house members. So we saw all of those. We saw the economic burdens. We saw the education burdens, people who weren't able to stay home and help their child distance learn. When I was a faculty member, I think of my students that didn't have a computer at home and they didn't have an internet at home. And so they're borrowing a friend's computer and sitting in a parking lot of Starbucks in order to be able to Zoom into a lecture, right? So we saw just how severe those impacts were. And so ARPA funding was used in part due to this public health emergency, and the Office of Equity work being done here is to try to evaluate how effective are our community partners in helping the county residents during COVID, as well as some of the other recent disasters and emergencies we've seen. PG&E, public safety power shutoffs, winter storms, the fires, the floods. So using these ARPA funds and building these partnerships to understand what's being done well, where is improvement needed? Who's being served? Who's not being served by these institutions, by our community partners, by the county? And then how can we be better prepared before the next emergency hits?
So
we are now. Oh, go ahead, Rubina.
So now we would like to kind of share this space with Adriana to share more about our work with Health Action Together. But before that, I want to share a little bit more about our work within the Office of Equity within Health Action Together, and particularly with the Portrait of Sonoma. I know that you all are all familiar with the Portrait of Sonoma, with the county's Portrait of Sonoma, and just acknowledging that the past Portrait of Sonoma data collection process that really was harmful and really called out Indigenous folks and Black people statistically insignificant. And we know that that has resulted in actual insignificance to policymakers and resource allocation decisions. These are the kinds of reports that have caused harm rather than an opportunity for healing, deepening our connections to an understanding of historical context for why the numbers actually look the way they do. We are really proud and recognize that it's our responsibility to ensure that we create new ways to engage with and for communities who've experienced this marginalization. And we were able to go through the data of Portrait of Sonoma and really acknowledge that it's not the end all be all, right? We know that it needs to be challenged, and we need to look at, and it needs to be looked at by community to ask, what is missing, what is more urgent, and why, and which is why we're actively engaged in participating in Health Action Together. So we're really excited to share more about how we are developing an agenda for action with Health Action Together and our work with that. So I will stop there to have an introduction for Adriana to share more about Health Action Together.
Thank you, Ruby. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Okay. I'm not sure because I don't have speakers on my computer, so I apologize. And I don't know how much time I have, so I'll try to speed up a little bit so there's some time for some questions. So my name is Adriana Rizon. I'm the Executive Director for Health Action Together. Essentially, it's a grassroots cross-sector collaboration and really a startup working to achieve health equity for every person in Sonoma County. So in partnership with communities most impacted by inequities, Health Action Together will begin by developing a roadmap for change called the Agenda for Action. We will then align partners or essentially organize our communities and cross-sector communities and change efforts that focus on system interventions and on grassroots and local action to activate the Agenda for Action. The Agenda for Action is essentially a response to and informed by the Portrait of Sonoma County 2021 update findings, and with guidance from communities most impacted by inequities. Health Action Together is developing an equity center process where trusted community leaders, such as yourselves here, work with affected communities to outline goals, priorities, and actions to reduce inequities identified in the census tracts with the lowest Human Development Index scores. Specifically, the Agenda for Action and Development will be guided by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or in other words, BIPOC. I will be using the term BIPOC, so that's what I'm referring to, under resource communities that are not represented in the data and communities experiencing the most significant inequities, specifically communities like Black, Asian American communities, BIPOC disability communities, American Indigenous, and American Native communities, Alaskan communities, BIPOC LGBTQ plus communities, Indigenous language communities, BIPOC single mothers, undocumented communities, farm worker communities, BIPOC elders, and youth. The goal of the Agenda for Action is to serve as a roadmap to direct institutional, political, philanthropic, and community-based efforts and resources. The Agenda for Action will also guide the work of Health Action Together long-term. That's just my spiel for now. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here and to share a little bit about the effort that I'm supporting. Now I will pass it back to the Office of Equity.
Thank you, Adriana, for sharing. We wanted to really make sure that Adriana had a moment just to share as an example of one of the community partnerships that the Office of Equity is engaged in. As we worked on the Portrait of Sonoma and saw so many of the, I'll say, opportunities to really strengthen the way that we are telling the stories of our communities and recognizing that past data collection efforts have been harmful and that it was our responsibility to kind of take that up, to do our best to turn it around, and then to really engage community. This is an example of one of the ways in which the Office of Equity had played a kind of key role as the interim board for the creation of Health Action Together, and continues to support the work of Health Action Together to create this Agenda for Action with community. This is now a time to kind of do Q&A, and we have some links in the chat, but we really want to start by saying that we have 2 positions currently on the street. So if you are interested in coming in and being a program planning and evaluation analyst with the County of Sonoma, that's actually a very cool job to help us work on creating systems to hold our internal county departments accountable for some of the race equity work that we are suggesting get done. So Barbara, this goes to your question around like, how do we hold the board accountable? We also have a position on the street for a secretary, really helping to lift up the administrative work inside of our office, and coming soon, another program planning and evaluation analyst to help us really launch anti-racist results-based accountability throughout the County of Sonoma. So those links are in the chat. Thank you. And it's time